Imagine standing inside a command tent in the summer of 1944, knowing that the fate of Western civilization rested on a single military operation that your own generals were telling you might not work. That is exactly where Dwight D. Eisenhower found himself in late July 1944, weeks after the most ambitious amphibious invasion in human history had landed on the beaches of Normandy. And yet the Allied forces were still trapped, bleeding, exhausted, and dangerously stalled in the hedgerows of a small French region called the Bocage. The war that was supposed to accelerate after D-Day had instead turned into a grinding, suffocating battle against nature and steel, where every field became a fortress and every road became a killing zone. German resistance was ferocious, the terrain was nightmarish, and the clock was ticking with brutal indifference. Men were dying by the thousands, supplies were being consumed at alarming rates, and the strategic window that the Allies needed to exploit was slowly, terrifyingly closing. Back in Washington and London, politicians and military planners were watching the situation with growing anxiety. The liberation of Europe, which had seemed so close on June 6th, now felt impossibly distant. Something had to change, or everything would collapse. If this story already has you gripped, you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel right now, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who loves real history, because what happened next in those Norman fields is one of the most dramatic and consequential decisions ever made in the history of modern warfare. Drop a comment below and tell us something you already know about Operation Cobra, or just tell us you are here and ready to learn. Omar Nelson Bradley was not a man given to panic. The commander of the American First Army was methodical, quiet, and deeply respected by his troops, who called him the GI's general for his unpretentious style and genuine concern for the lives of ordinary soldiers. But by mid-July 1944, even Bradley was deeply troubled. The Allied advance through Normandy had stalled in the infamous Bocage, a landscape of dense hedgerows, sunken lanes, and thick undergrowth that the Germans had masterfully turned into an almost impenetrable defensive network. Every American attempt to push south had been met with brutal counterattacks from elite German formations, including units of the 2nd SS Panzer Division and the Panzer Lehr Division, commanded by the formidable General Fritz Bayerlein. The casualty rates were staggering. The U.S. Army was losing men faster in some of these hedgerow battles than it had on Omaha Beach itself. Bradley went to Eisenhower with a stark assessment. Without a radical change in tactics, the breakout from Normandy might not happen at all. He needed something bold, something that had never quite been attempted at this scale, a concentrated, massive aerial bombardment immediately followed by a ground assault, designed to blow a hole clean through the German lines. The plan would be called Operation Cobra, and it was, by any honest measure, a desperate gamble. Eisenhower listened to Bradley's concerns with the same composed intensity that had defined his command style since the North Africa Campaign of 1942. Born in Denison, Texas, in 1890 and raised in Abilene, Kansas, Eisenhower had spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of moment, not on the battlefield himself, but in the impossible space where strategy, politics, logistics, and human psychology intersected. He had commanded the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942, the assault on Sicily in July 1943, and the landings at Salerno that same September. He understood failure intimately. He had seen it in the disastrous airborne drops on Sicily, in the bloody repulse at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, where American forces had been humiliated by Rommel's veterans in February 1943. He did not flinch from difficult truths. When Bradley laid out the risks of Operation Cobra, including the terrifying possibility of American bombs falling on American troops due to the proximity of the front lines, Eisenhower did not dismiss those fears. He acknowledged them fully. But his response, recorded in post-war accounts and military histories, revealed the kind of leadership that defined his entire command. He told Bradley that the risk of doing nothing was far greater than the risk of trying something dangerous. Stalemate was not a neutral condition. Stalemate in this war meant defeat. Slow, grinding, inevitable defeat. The planning for Operation Cobra accelerated through the third week of July 1944. Even as the fighting in the Bocage continued to extract its terrible toll. General Bernard Montgomery, commanding the British and Canadian forces to the east near Cannes, had launched Operation Goodwood on July 18th, a massive armored offensive intended partly to draw German attention and panzer reserves away from the American sector. Goodwood consumed enormous resources, involved over 1,100 British tanks, and resulted in heavy casualties, including the loss of more than 400 armored vehicles in 3 days of fighting. Montgomery declared it a success in terms of wearing down German armor, but critics, including many American officers, were openly skeptical and sometimes contemptuous. The tension between British and American commanders was palpable and dangerous. Eisenhower himself wrote a sharp, frustrated letter to Montgomery on July 21st, urging more aggressive action. The relationship between the two men, always complicated, was under severe strain. Meanwhile, the German command under Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, who had replaced the wounded Erwin Rommel after a British aircraft strafed Rommel's staff car on July 17th, was working furiously to hold the line, knowing that a major American offensive was likely coming, but uncertain exactly where and when. July 24th, 1944 was supposed to be the day everything changed. The plan for Operation Cobra called for approximately 2,500 Allied aircraft, including B-17 Flying Fortresses, B-24 Liberators, and medium bombers, to carpet bomb a narrow rectangular zone just south of the St. Lo to Purriers Road, pulverizing the German defenses before Bradley's infantry and armor surged through the gap. But on July 24th, the weather was poor, communications broke down, and the bombing was aborted midway, yet not before some aircraft had already released their payloads. In a catastrophic error, several bomb loads fell short, landing among American troops of the 30th Infantry Division. 25 American soldiers were killed and 131 were wounded by their own air force in what became one of the most painful friendly fire incidents of the war. Bradley was furious. He demanded changes in the bombing approach vector for the following day. The Army Air Forces agreed to some modifications but resisted others. The tension between ground commanders and air commanders, a chronic problem throughout the Northwest Europe campaign, flared dangerously. And yet, July 25th was set as the new date. There would be no further postponement. The operation would proceed, whatever the cost. You are now exactly at the heart of this story. And if you have stayed this far, you already understand why this moment matters so deeply. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Give this video a like and share it with a friend, a student, or anyone who believes that real history is more gripping than anything fiction can produce. And leave a comment. Tell us what detail has surprised you most so far, or ask the question that is forming in your mind right now. On the morning of July 25, 1944, the sky over Normandy filled with the thunder of engines as wave after wave of Allied bombers approached the target zone. General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer to die in the European theater of the war, was on the ground that morning, observing the operation firsthand. Then the bombs fell short again. In a repeat of the horror of the previous day, American ordnance once more struck American soldiers. 111 American troops were killed and nearly 500 were wounded. Leslie McNair, a three-star general who had done more than almost any other officer to build, train, and organize the U.S. Army for this war, was killed instantly, his body so badly damaged that he could only be identified by the 3 stars on his collar. Bradley was shattered. He later wrote that the news of the short bombing made him physically ill. In his memoirs, he described July 25th as one of the darkest days of his professional life. And yet, and this is the pivot on which history turned, the bombardment had also done something extraordinary to the German lines. Despite the tragic short bombs, the weight of the aerial assault had been genuinely apocalyptic in the target zone. General Fritz Bayerlein, commanding Panzerlehr, later reported that after the bombing his division had simply ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. He described the scene as a landscape from the moon, craters, silence, and the complete disintegration of unit cohesion. Bradley gave the order to advance. American infantry and armor, including elements of the 1st Infantry Division, the 4th Infantry Division, and General J. Lawton Collins' 7th Corps, pushed into the devastated German lines on the afternoon of July 25th and the following morning. Initial progress was slower than hoped, and German resistance, even from shattered units, remained determined. But by July 27th, the cracks in the German line had become a breach, and by July 28th, that breach had become a catastrophic rupture. General George S. Patton's Third Army, newly activated on August 1st, began pouring through the gap at Avranches, turning the breakout into a pursuit. Patton, aggressive, theatrical, brilliantly gifted at mobile warfare, drove his forces at speeds that astonished even optimistic Allied planners. Within days, American armor was ranging deep into the French interior, liberated towns were celebrating in the streets, and the entire German strategic position in Normandy was collapsing with breathtaking speed. The stalemate that had seemed immovable 2 weeks earlier had shattered like glass. What Bradley had feared might fail had, against all the tragic odds, succeeded beyond almost anyone's expectations. The liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944, exactly 1 month after Operation Cobra broke the German line, stands as one of the most emotionally overwhelming moments of the 20th century. General Charles de Gaulle entered the city to scenes of extraordinary popular joy, and the image of a free France rose again from years of occupation and humiliation. But the road to Paris ran directly through those terrible July days, through the hedgerows, the short bombs, the dead at St-Lô, and the conversation in that command tent where Bradley told Eisenhower the plan might fail, and Eisenhower looked back and said, in essence, "We try anyway, because there is no acceptable alternative to trying." That exchange, that moment of leadership under conditions of genuine, crushing uncertainty, is what this story has always really been about. History does not belong only to those who succeed cleanly and without loss. It belongs to those who carry the weight of possible failure and move forward regardless, accountable to something larger than their own fear. Eisenhower would go on to accept the German surrender on May 8, 1945. Bradley would command the largest American field army ever assembled. But neither man ever forgot those days in Normandy, the days when the war's outcome hung by a thread, and they chose together to pull it anyway. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded what real leadership looks like. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment below telling us which figure in this story you found most remarkable and why. History is not just the past. It is the clearest mirror we have for understanding who we are.